Hello everyone. So this video is on, Unit 4, Lesson 4, Factoring to Solve Quadratic Equations. So you should be aware of other ways to solve from the previous lesson, but today we are going over specifically using factoring to solve. So this first problem says if A times B is equal to 0, what must be true? So either option A has to be 0, B has to be 0, or either A is equal to 0 or B is equal to 0. And the correct option is C, because if you have two things multiplied together that give you 0, that means one of them has to be equal to 0. So we're going to use that. That is what we call the zero product property. So this problem says factor this trinomial and then graph using Desmos to find the solutions. So we're going to pull up Desmos here. And while that's loading, I'm going to factor this trinomial. So in order to factor, I need to find the two numbers that multiply together to be -3 and add together to be -2, and that is -3 and +1. So I have x plus 1 times x minus 3, because if you multiply those two, you're going to get -3, add them together, and you get -2. And this is equal to 0, so then I'm going to pull up Desmos. Oops, wrong Desmos. And then I'm going to graph the equation, and I have it on my other screen just so I can see it. So when I type it in, just like it is in the equation with it equal to 0, it doesn't work. It tells me plotting single variable implicit equations is disabled. So basically, you can't do that. So you can either just delete the equals 0, or you can change it into like equals y. But basically what you want to do is find it as a function and then click on where it crosses the x-intercept. So my answers are going to be x is -1 or x is 3. So you should see a relationship, x is equal to -1 or x is equal to 3. You should see a relationship between my factors and my values that I found for the solutions. So you might think, well, I just need to change the sign. And that's not exactly true, because sometimes you'll end up with factors that aren't just, variable plus a number. So what this zero product property is saying is if you have several factors being multiplied together and the total product is equal, then one of the factors is equal to 0. So I would split this into two equations. One for this first factor, x plus 1, could be equal to 0, or x minus 3, the other factor, could be equal to 0. And then they should be really easy equations, one-step equations. Subtract 1 from both sides, you end up with x is equal to 1. Add 3 to both sides, you end up with x is equal to 3. So that is how you solve by factoring. You factor it out, and then you figure out what you do to get each of the factors equal to 0. So we're going to try some practice problems. These are going to be really, really easy because they're already factored for us. So I'm going to take this first one, x minus 5, set that equal to 0. Add 5 to both sides, opposite operations, and I end up with x is equal to 5. My next one, x plus 2, is equal to 0, opposite operation, subtract 2, and I end up with x is equal to -2. And you might be able to do that in your head. You might be able to think, well, if x minus 5 is equal to 0, x has to be 5. So you might be able to do those in your head. But when we move on to this next problem here, that's one that you'll probably want to write it all out because there's some more steps. So I'm going to do the first one. 2x plus 12 is equal to 0. Opposite operation, so this is where you want to use SADMEP that we learned in first semester. Subtract 12 from both sides, and you end up with 2x is equal to -12. So that's my addition or subtraction. Multiplication and division is next, so I divide both sides by 2, and I end up with x is equal to -6. So x is equal to -6 would be my first solution. And then if I go on to the next one, 3x minus 7, 3x minus 7 is equal to 0. Add 7 to both sides. 3x is equal to 7. Divide both sides by 3, and I end up with x is equal to 7 over 3. So this would be a good example of a problem that you wouldn't want to solve using graphing. Because Desmos doesn't give you fraction answers, it always gives you decimal answers, which is fine for some problems, but if you're trying to find a fraction answer, you're going to get that a lot easier using factoring because you're doing your opposite operations and you end up with a fraction instead of a decimal. So those would be my two solutions, x is equal to -6 or x is equal to 7 over 3. All right, so now they're going to get a little bit tougher because we don't have this factored already. So I have to figure out how to factor it. And because I've had a lot of experience with this, I'm pretty quick at this. I know my numbers are 10 and 1 because I need two numbers that multiply together to be 10, add together to be 11. So I'm going to end up with t plus 1 and t plus 10. And so my numbers are 1 and 10, put it into my factors. If you are not sure how to factor these, I definitely recommend going to the Factoring Trinomials YouTube videos from the previous unit. That's going to be really helpful for you. So now that I've got them in the factors, it's pretty straightforward. I know that if t plus 1 is equal to 0, then t has to be -1. And if t plus 10 is equal to 0, then t has to be -10. So if you just have like variable plus a number, really all you're doing is looking for the that number with the opposite sign. So plus 10 becomes -10, plus 1 becomes -1. Like I said before, that isn't always going to work. If you have like anything else in the factors, it's not going to work. So you have to set up the equations. But for more simple factors like this, it's a little bit of a shortcut. So moving on to our next problem, you should have a couple of different ways that you know how to solve these. I prefer the box method, so that's what I'm going to use. So I need to find my AC. So I need to multiply my A term, which is 2, times my C term, which is -36, because our general form is ax squared plus bx plus c. So 2 times -36, -72? 2 times -36 equals -72. Second guess myself. So, -72, so two numbers that multiply together to be -72 and add together to my b value, which is -21. I don't think there's a whole lot of factors of -72. I don't know this one off the top of my head. Okay, so 72 divided by 3. Yep, that'll be it. So I know that I want the bigger number to be negative because we want to add together to be a negative number. So my two numbers are going to be -24 times +3, because if you multiply negative times a positive, you get a negative, and we want the bigger number to be negative because we wanted a negative sum. So if I add those two together, I do get -21. So those are my two numbers. So I'm going to put -24x. Oh no, it's q. Different variable, q, in this box. And then I'm going to put 3q in this box. And then in my other two boxes, I'm going to put my entire first term and my entire last term. So 2q squared goes here, and then -36 goes here. And now I'm going to find the greatest common factor of each column and row. So I usually start with the columns. So 2q squared and -24q, greatest common factor is going to be 2q. Second column, 3q and -36, greatest common factor is going to be 3 plus 3. And then first row, greatest common factor is going to be q. I'll go back to black, I guess. And then -24, -36 might be 4. 24 divided by 4 gives you 6. Oh, it is 6, actually. 24 divided by 6. Wait, no. Yeah. No, it's 12. That's what it is. Sometimes it takes a bit. So it would be negative 12. Because if I factor that out, then I'm left with a 2 and a 3. Yeah. And those don't have any common factors. So negative 12 would be the greatest common factor of those two. And I factor out a negative because they were both negative. So then my two factors along the top and along the sides are going to be 2q plus 3 times q minus 12. And this is just another way of writing this quadratic up at the top, so it's equal to 0. So that means that either my first factor is equal to 0 or my second factor is equal to 0. So 2q plus 3 equals 0. Subtract 3 from both sides and then divide 2. I know I'm rushing a little bit because I want to make sure I get to all the problems in time. So this gives me negative 3 over 2 when you subtract 3 from both sides and then divide both sides by 2. I know I'm not modeling the best showing your work, but you do want to show all your work. And then we also have q minus 12 is equal to 0. Add 12 to both sides, and you get q is equal to 12. So the two solutions would be negative 3 over 2 and 12. All right, now this one is a little bit tricky because it's not equal to 0. So what we have to do is subtract 42 from both sides. And that way it's going to be equal to 0 because the whole point is looking to see like what factors, oops, that's not what I wanted. What factors are going to be equal to 0. So x squared plus 13x minus 42 is equal to 0. That's the format that we want. So then I'm going to figure out what two numbers multiply together to be negative 32 and add together to be positive 13. So, well, negative 6 times 7 is going to give you 42. But let me think. 42 divided by 3, what's that going to give you? Can't add those two. Okay, so you need a positive and a negative, and the bigger one has to be positive because you want it to add together. So I'm not thinking of any numbers off the top of my head. I thought about it. I can't figure out any numbers. So what I'm going to do is double check this one and see if there are any solutions. Yeah, there are solutions. But I can't factor it. So this is an example of one that we can't solve using any of the methods that we've learned so far, because if I look at this graph, clearly these are going to be like some kind of fractional answers, but I can't factor this trinomial. And I can't figure out, like, if it's a multiple choice question and it's fractions, I can't figure that out. So this is a problem that you're going to need to use a different method. And we will learn that method in the future, but this is just an example of you can't always solve all the problems with the methods that you know so far. So you're going to learn another method in the next lesson. If you have any questions, make sure that you're reaching out to your teachers.